pillars of greatness. The last stroke which leveled this beautiful relic was struck about 15 years ago by a party of the natives for the sake of iron, which united the stones together. My informant was a peasant who daily attended me in my researches and who confessed to have been one in the act of depredation. This is the ruins of the same palace outside the platform, and here is a reconstruction of the same palace, known Palace E, or probably an audience hall outside the ones outside the platform. Here's a reconstruction by Persepolis 3D by two German architects. And then the last engravings in line of those early travelers or early exploration illustrations and views have been left by this German adventurer and traveler, Carsten Niebuhr. Niebuhr's work appeals or interests more philologists because he copied an entire inscription in cuneiform from Persepolis that actually paved the way for the decipherment of cuneiform later in Germany and in other parts of Western Europe. Here's his picture, Carsten Niebuhr, who visited the site maybe in the years 1767, 65. He stayed there for a few days, but he copied whatever he could, including Middle Persian inscriptions and some medieval Islamic inscriptions, whatever he could see. He was aided by a French who resided in Shiraz, so the Frenchman translated some of the and copied some of the inscriptions in Arabic or in Persian for him. But you can still find some errors in the copies. But you know, these are the first complete copies of Persepolitan inscriptions, Achaemenid, post-Achaemenid, published in Europe in late 18th century. Oh, here's the Niebuhr's copy of the trilingual inscriptions at Persepolis that was used later by Grotefend in the early years of the 19th century. I'm going to skip the work of these British diplomats. Well, their work is important for archaeology, not for visual documents or the purpose of this talk. William Ouseley and James Morier, who went to Persepolis in the early years of the 19th century and who excavated the site in search of fragments, sculptured fragments. It's why you have so many of these fragments now in Britain. But a fascinating endeavor by Ouseley and Morier. By the way, for those of you interested in Persian and the history of Persian language and its education of Europeans, William Ouseley is the one who wrote the first manual of Persian in English for English students, and Morier was a secretary of the mission who went to Persepolis and excavated some of the fragments. Their successor, another British, is much more interesting, and this is the famous Robert K. Porter. And I was amazed when I saw when Kirsten gave me a tour of the exhibition here, and I saw a quotation from K. Porter's travels. If you Google Kerr Porter, Robert Kerr Porter, his name would come up as a painter. And in fact, he was a painter. He was a talented painter and draftsman. He was married to a Russian princess. He resided in St. Petersburg. And his wife was a cousin of a famous Russian Orientalist, Alexis Nikolaevich Olinin, who was from the Russian nobility and who had influence in Russian court, Tsarist court of Russia. And Olinin was very interested in acquiring better pictures of Persepolis, Achaemenid ruins in general. And he found no one better than Kerr Porter, who was a trained artist in the fields of military and historical sketches and paintings and biblical subjects. And he wrote a letter. He asked Kerr Porter to actually go to Iran, to Persia. And in his letter to Kerr Porter, he outlined specific instructions stressing that such drawings should be made with accuracy and to use hatches to indicate lost fragments or parts, for example. And let me read part of Olinin's letter to Kerr Porter. He says, I place my confidence in your plain dealing that you will decide the controversy by taking the trouble to make your drawings on the spot and with scrupulous exactness copying the object before you line by line. Indeed, I conjure you, in the name of the holy antiquity, to mark down nothing but what you actually see, nothing suppose, nothing repair. I only beg you to represent the original ancient remains. In conclusion, I repeat, draw only what you see, correct nothing, and preserve in your copies the true character of the originals. Do not give to Persian figures a French tournure like Chardin, nor a Dutch like Van Bruyne, nor a German or rather Danish like Niebuhr, nor an English grace like some of your countrymen in your portraits of the fragments at Nakhshe-Rustam or Persepolis. And indeed, the images reproduced by Kerr Porter were the first accurate illustrations of Persepolis appeared in Europe at that time, including this very early first map of the citadel of Persepolis and the ruins, and his views of sculptures. He paid so much detail in his drawings, and Kerr Porter had an adventurous life. He ended up fighting on the side of Bolivar in South America much later after his travels to Persia. Some of the views reproduced by Kerr Porter, details, architectural details, art historical details of columns, capitals, etc. And he also he was interested in other ruins, like Sasanian reliefs at Nakhshe-Rustam and other sites like this one at Nakhshe-Rajab. He copied at his best. He knew Greek, but he couldn't read Pahlavi or Middle Persian, so scholars might find errors in his copying, but these are really pioneer copies that reached Europe in the early years of the 19th century, I would say 1818 or 1819. A great romantic traveler with an admiration of the ruins. He's also credited to be the first who reproduced a complete, more or less accurate drawing of the Bisotun reliefs and inscriptions. I don't know if he did it with a naked eye or he used some some instruments, telescopic instrument, to copy, but as far as we can tell from his drawing, this is fairly accurate. You know, he couldn't see the inscription, yes, but he marked the place of the inscription. He writes that, okay, I see something, maybe a text written like those engraved on different structures at Persepolis. But I think that his view of the reliefs is accurate. Then this was as far as the British could go in this game of illustrating Persepolis. And then later the French travelers took over with this man, Charles Texier, who visited the ruins in 1840 and who reproduced the first, I would say, art historical views of sculptures and different structures. Texier is the one who believed that the sculptures at Persepolis were in color, and we know that they were in color. And he even tested some of the, he took some of the samples from one of the sculptures. And here's two views of by Texier. He also reproduced this type of architecture details with sections, very measured sections and plans that served the basis for later reconstruction, subsequent reconstruction essays of Persepolis. And he's the one who paid attention for the first time to the facade of the rock-cut tombs, Achaemenid rock-cut tombs at Persepolis and Nakhchi-Rustam. And he found out that this was probably the first reproduction of an Achaemenid building. And indeed, it is the first reproduction of an Achaemenid palace, the entrance, the facade of a palace, reproduced on those monumental rock-cut tombs of Nakhchi-Rustam or at Persepolis. Well, I think that some of you are familiar with these two gentlemen, two French artists, Eugène Flandin and Pascal Coste. If you go to the galleries, I think you can see their name, because Flandin and Coste worked for the French mission in Mesopotamia, and they illustrated the magnificent discoveries of the French archaeologists, travelers like Paul-Émile Botta at Khorsabad. They also traveled to Iran on a mission headed by Comte de Cersei on behalf of Louis Philippe of France in 1849, 1850. You know that after the Russo-Persian Wars that ended in 1828, I think, the diplomatic relations between France and Iran were not good. It's why Louis Philippe sent a new mission to the court of Muhammad Shah, who hated the British, by the way, to sort of reestablish their diplomatic relation. And Flandin and Coste were members of that mission. Flandin was a trained artist painter who had won a few prizes in France, and Coste was an extremely talented architect who could draw, could paint,